Hello and good day from the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. And to everybody, we hope, who is tuning in, looking in, watching in, all around the world. My name is Alison Smale. I'm a journalist whose moment of glory in journalism came covering the anti-communist revolutions of 1989. Most especially close to my heart is the date November 17th, when that really got things rolling. So it's wonderful to have this lecture on the anniversary. I'm honored indeed to introduce participants. First of all, the ambassador and plenipotentiary of the Republic of Slovakia to the United States of America, Radovan Dvorčík. Mr. Dvorčík graduated from the Slovak Technical University in Slovakia and from the Institute of International Relations at Comenius University in Bratislava. He joined the office of the President of the Slovak Republic, first of all, and later became a member of the Slovak Foreign Service. He took up his post in Washington, D.C. earlier this year and has held a number of posts which give him great insight into the workings of NATO. Thank you so much for being here. You are a fluent English speaker and Russian speaker, as well as Czech, and you understand French and colloquial German and Spanish. So multifaceted. Very nice to have you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to Wilson Center for being our host again and partner for this freedom lectures for many years. I wish to thank also the Friends of Slovakia, the American Friends of the Czech Republic, the Czech ambassador, the Czech embassy, and my staff at my embassy for making this event possible within the COVID protocols. And I hope next year we will meet in Wilson Center in person. I'll make a few observations and comments at the beginning of this freedom lecture. Although I don't have data, hard data, I assume that at least 30% of our populations in Slovakia and Czech Republic were born after 1989. So that means that full generation does not know what does it mean to live under a communist regime. But most of us are lucky that we have lived our lives longer outside than inside of the communist totalitarian cage. For those of us who stood on the cold streets of Bratislava, Prague, and many other places, we are still wondering how it was possible to overturn peacefully a regime that was so fundamentally cruel, intolerant, and able to control all of our lives. Those of us who were feeling the freezing temperatures of November '89 recall that we could not travel, not speak, not to learn or study freely. There was not a fictitious big brother, but the real totalitarian power which dictated what we can read, learn, and what jobs we can take and where to travel. In 1989, we still lived Orwellian 1984. Maybe that was the power that erased differences in personal views that united us, the public, under the wish that love and truth truly wins over the lies and hatred. As my President of the Republic said yesterday, in November 1989, we were successful because people did not fight only for their own individual goals, but for common good, not only for their own freedom, but for the freedom for all. With freedom comes also responsibility and uncertainties. Quoting my president again, many thought that regained freedom means an individual right to do anything. However, freedom without responsibility may lead to forceful usurpation of one will over the rest. Freedom does not rest in law, that does not rest in law and moral ground is destructive power. Freedom does not mean hatred against others with different opinions or against minorities. Freedom does not mean verbal or physical attacks on first responders, doctors, shopkeepers, and I humbly add, to journalists who uncover uneasy truth about systemic corruption, influence of oligarchs, harmful connections between business and politics. Slovakia learned hard lessons on freedom of press, transparency, and feelings of impunity. In 1996, Madeleine Albright described Slovakia as black hole in Europe. In 2018, a young couple was murdered because Ján Kuciak just was doing his job. Today's Freedom Lecture is not about the past and huge importance of articles like 2000 words, Charter 77, or Bratislava Aloud. It's about challenges that we face now, or why we and fair media are so crucial to keep positive vision of the better tomorrows. As in the past, it was Voice of America or Radio Free Europe, Radio Luxembourg, and many others. Today, it is also a kind of accountable outlets that do not rely on algorithms or commands from the politicians, or on, but on the vision that love, truth will prevail over lies and hatred. Thank you, and I am looking forward to all the debates in today's proceedings. Thank you, Alison.
Well, thank you. It was very nice to hear. And now I would like to have the honor to introduce your Czech counterpart, if I may say that, Ambassador Hinek Kmoniček, who has been in his post since 2017. Before that, he held a number of interesting posts, most importantly, the director of the Foreign Affairs Department in the office of the President of the Czech Republic. Before joining the Foreign Service, the ambassador studied English and Arabic, and he has indeed worked quite extensively in the Middle East and elsewhere. He apparently enjoys cooking ethnical cuisine, collecting the hottest sauces on this planet. And he writes for magazines and newspapers, so is confronted with our daily dilemma of what shall we tell the world. Ambassador, the floor, such as it is yours, the virtual floor. Thank you. Can Ambassador Kmoniček hear me? Maybe we'll come back to him in a minute. We can proceed with me inviting Beata to take up some words, but it's too bad to lose the Czech ambassador. Beata, you might have to improvise here.
Hello, good afternoon from Bratislava. I'm so honored that I was invited to speak on this lecture, and I assume that we will wait until Ambassador is able to deliver his comments. But if not, otherwise I can start my talk. But please give me a signal if I should do so.
I believe we must press ahead with the proceedings, unless somebody tells us otherwise. I would give the floor to Beata. Does this seem, nobody seems to be objecting to this suggestion. Let's come back to him. Let's go ahead, Beata. Sorry to force everybody to change their paces, but it's the technology, not me. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Dirty anti-Slovak prostitutes, a flock of swine of George Soros, hyenas, slimy snakes, and idiots. These are only a few of the names that former Prime Minister Robert Fico has used publicly for journalists in Slovakia. both in power and opposition, before and after the murder of investigative journalist Ján Kuciak. It did not take long for Igor Matovič, after beating Fico in the elections, to verbally attack journalists.
Hello.
He said, "We are blinded by hate, take orders from oligarchs, and our goal is to humiliate him." You might be wondering why I started my talk with one of the most notorious journalist haters in Slovakia. Please bear with me. It's not a trick to get your attention, especially with having these small technical difficulties. The reaction of Fico and Matovič to journalists prove that our country has a functioning, free and critical press. It has been a long and difficult journey. We journalists, just like the society, had to mature and had to grow up. Many of us survived Vladimir Mečiar, who in the 90s sold state property for bodies for a dime. He ordered the abduction of the president's son and pushed the country to international isolation. As Madeleine Albright described, he made Slovakia the black hole of Europe. We survived 3 governments of Robert Fico. He created a system where party connection brought fortune, political positions, and protection from prosecution. Some of us are survivors of oligarchic media capture. Unfortunately, there were victims. Our hearts will never stop bleeding for Ján Kuciak and his fiancée Martina Kušnírova. But we are here, and we report about how oligarchs close to the Smer party penetrated the police and prosecution, how politicians interpret public service as a chance to get rich. We are here to bust myths and lies that are now replacing facts and science. We are here to report that 30 years after the revolution, our democratic institutions are once again under attack. And we are here to warn that Viktor Orbán keeps inspiring wannabe autocrats in the whole region. He has already invited Jaroslaw Kaczynski of Poland to apply his methods. Orbán is ready to export his model of media capture across the region. But let's leave rulers alone for a while. I would like to take you to my own beginnings, to the 70s in former Czechoslovakia, to a small village called Gemerská Panica. I take you to a kitchen with a stove, no hot water, no television, but thousands of stories that generations have left in porcelain cups. After dark, the women of the family would tell stories about men who came back from the Second World War so thin and so weak that they had to feed them like little children. Some, after getting strong, tortured their wives to death because of all the horrors they had seen. I heard stories about the local chief Communist Party member who ordered the confiscation of the cows of my grand auntie. She kept cursing him until he hanged himself in his cellar. Is that really true? I asked my grandmother while listening to these stories. When you grow up, you will find it out. We only pass on the stories we have heard, but you can search the truth, she replied. After growing up in a society where truth was never public and critical journalism was a privilege of some samizdats and banned authors, I wanted to be more than just the local storyteller. Though I really loved all my local storytellers, and I still feel deep connection with those stories. But I will take you now to 1989, to the main hall of the Communist University. A couple of days after students were brutally beaten by the police in Prague, I sat there with my fellow students, trying to figure out our roles. Are we journalism students or revolutionaries? Shall we march and shout out for freedom of speech, or shall we take notes and photos? We, of course, went to protest to the squares. We understood that freedom was the toughest and the most important lesson we have to learn. But we had no idea how difficult it was going to be and how long it would take. After a couple of weeks, I had to return to school only to find there a grim reality of journalism education. Professors who taught critique of bourgeois media, philosophy of Marxism, Leninism, or history of the communist press tried to reinvent themselves. It did not work. We lacked a generation of experienced journalists who would explain us the basics, how to make a reporting balanced, how to quote sources, how to separate facts from opinion. And that fact-checking is not censorship, and editors are not censors. Suddenly we were free to write whatever we wanted, but only a few were telling us how to do it. One of the very first people who told me that I need multiple sources to write a story was a Fulbright scholar, Maureen Nemechek, who came to Bratislava in 1992 from Oklahoma. Beata, come to the United States to study journalism. You can get into any school you wanted, even Columbia, she told me. There is, however, an interesting detail connected to Maureen. In 1993, she was most excited about the story of brave reporters of the Smena Daily who, in protest of state interventions into their newsrooms, left and went to start their own newspaper. She wanted to meet the editor-chief at that time, Karol Ježík, who is no longer alive, unfortunately, and the founder, Alexej Fulmek. Today, I am the editor-in-chief of that newspaper. I did get a Fulbright grant. I went to the United States to learn golden rules of journalism. I will be thankful for that for the rest of my life, for that experience. I came back to Slovakia in 1995, but no school prepared me for the experience of backsliding in democracy under the regime of Vladimír Mečiar. I worked at the English news desk of the state-run news agency TASE. I had a very short career there. It lasted until I failed to produce celebratory stories about a HZDS Congress. It was the party of Vladimír Mečiar. And I tried to balance my reporting with quotes from opposition politicians. Of course, my case of repression was too modest compared to those who reported the story of the abduction of President's son, the massive abuse of the Slovak intelligence service, as well as the wild privatization of state property. At that time, the Slovak intelligence service followed and wiretaped journalists. Mečiar went further than just verbal attacks. A former boxer, he once punched a reporter after he asked him repeatedly about his luxury villa. But the horror of Mečiar and his regime was a kind of vaccination for my generation of journalists. Since then, we have been prepared to alert the society when noticing any deviations from the rule of law. Since then, we harshly criticize people who abuse their power and very carefully inspect what they try to hide under the argument of state interest. We have understood the risk of populism and the dangers of state interventions into the media. Unfortunately, since the fall of Mečiar regime, we have seen again all those things. There is time now for another scene. Editors of all major dailies from Slovakia sitting around a long table at the offices of the government, invited by then Prime Minister Robert Fico. We are shocked, angry, and we are bleeding. Our colleague Ján Kuciak and his fiancee Martina Kušnírova have been brutally murdered. Our host is assuring us that the police will do everything to find the murderers. But this happened only a couple of minutes after Fico held a press conference and theatrically put €1 million in actual banknotes on the table for anyone who could provide information about the murderers. It was like a scene from a mafia movie, and it all felt so wrong. They were confused and they told us that they don't understand how it could have happened, and it doesn't make sense that the journalist was killed in Slovakia. My colleague Matúš Kostolný, the editor-chief of Denníken, commented that it was perhaps the right time to talk about the mounting verbal attacks against journalists. Fico was appalled. He did not see any connection. But verbal attacks against journalists can make them targets. If you dehumanize journalists, name them enemies and the dirt of the society, then someone might just assume that it's okay to get rid of them. Many politicians still don't seem to understand that their words might be triggers. The investigation into the murder unveiled the practice of brutal surveillance of journalists. It was not organized directly by the state, as it was under Mečiar, but one of the proteges of the regime, a mafia figure, Ján Kuciak, the suspected mastermind of the murder of Ján Kuciak, and his friend Peter Tóth. Tóth is a former journalist who in the mid-90s investigated crimes of the Mečiar regime, but later he switched sides and he went straight from the editorial room to serve the intelligence services. Kočner's commando followed journalists to their private places, took photos of their families, their children. Tóth said that it was just ordinary paparazzi. He keeps saying it all over again. In fact, Ján Kuciak was among the journalists whom they monitored. Kočner allegedly once told Tóth, it would be enough to kill one journalist and all the others would get scared and leave them alone. If that did not work, he would take down another one. It did not work though, quite the contrary. It is only thanks to journalists that we have learned all the details of the underworld that Kočner and oligarchs close to the Smer party has built. Slovak journalists once again did an incredible investigative work. I could name them one after other, but I might forget someone and I would feel bad about that. Robert Fico had to step down under public pressure, and today several functionaries of his party are under criminal prosecution. But right now, Fico wants to come back again. And this time he has an efficient role model, Viktor Orbán. I will take you to Budapest now. It is 2019 and I am sitting with a group of media freedom watchdogs at the editorial office of Nimrod, a hunting magazine. We are meeting Zoltán Kovács, the international spokesman of the Hungarian government, who is actually at the same time the editor-in-chief of this magazine. Very weird, but this is the least disturbing detail of that press freedom mission. Kovács tells us that journalists are not entitled to control any government, and that critical journalists in Hungary are political activists anyway, and Hungary haters, of course. Hungarian colleagues whom we met have described a coordinated system of censorship, not seen since the fall of the communist regime. Orbán doesn't need to kill journalists or to jail journalists. His government silences the critical press through manipulations of the media market, forced takeover of critical media, the delegitimization of journalists. His empire of pro-government propaganda media, it's a waste machine which disseminates fake news for free. Orbán is actually no longer Hungary's problem. He aims to export his illiberal media model elsewhere in Europe, and autocrats across Visegrad are eager to learn from him. I know I mentioned this already once, but I feel this is such an important message that I would like to stress what is happening now. He massively invests in media in Slovakia, Romania, Slovenia, and Croatia. He's trying to kidnap the Visegrad and turn it into an alliance against Brussels and liberal democracy, claiming that EU doesn't respect the national identity of Hungary and Poland. His narrative is quite appealing for autocrats and corrupt politicians. Central Europe and post-communist countries need a special kind, a tailor-made rule of law and democracy. which leads us to Brussels now. Whenever I meet EU officials and representatives of EU institutions, which happens quite often, they ask me, how should the EU improve the situation of journalists? I say the Union should enforce their own rules when it comes to press freedom and human rights and rule of law. We journalists will do our job. We will report when there are violations and deformations of democracy, but you protect your own values. There are no different versions of democracy for each autocrat. There is just one version of democracy. Now, let's go back to Bratislava again. Slovakia is undergoing a purge of state power. Former police presidents are accused of abuse of power, and high-ranking state officials stand accused of corruption. These are challenging times again for journalists. We must closely watch if the police and prosecution respect the law, even when they prosecute people who, according to our opinion, deserve it. And we face attacks once again. They call us agents of foreign power and oligarchs, and of course, George Soros. Unfortunately, oligarchs have been aggressively buying media in Central Europe. My own personal story got entangled with an oligarchy group, Penta. Let me take you to another scene. It is late autumn, 2014, and I am sitting in the office of Petit Press with Alexei Fulmek, who is the publisher and founder of the Daily SME. He's asking me to take over as editor-in-chief. Penta, involved in corruption scandal Gorilla, brought shares of the publishing house through a mediator and forcefully entered the publishing house. Penta was buying media to improve their stained image, a kind of atomic weapon. That's how they looked at all media they were about to buy and they bought. Yet by interventions into the newsrooms they made, it just further harmed their already bad reputation. So there we were, Alexei, the genuine publisher, one of the best media minds in Slovakia, and me facing the Hamletian question. Should we try to keep SME alive or let it to fall apart? My friends and colleagues were leaving SME in protest against Penta. They established their own newspaper, which has grown into a successful and important publication. I stayed with Alexei, and together with a handful of people, I was trying to keep SME independent. As some of you might know, there is a happy ending to this story. We have not only survived Penta, but we have rebuilt SME and we kept SME independent. So the good news is that you can survive oligarchs. Our secret of success was the combination of a publisher who understands media and journalists who have integrity. Penta understood that they simply cannot penetrate SME. They cannot change our DNA, which was from its very establishment oriented at independence and fight for freedom and the rule of law and against corruption. Finally, Penta sold their stock to a New York registered nonprofit investment fund for independent media. You might be asking, why is Slovakia's media environment in better shape than that of Hungary's or Poland's? As I mentioned already, we were vaccinated against backsliding in democracy early on by the Mečiar regime. We learned not to depend on state advertisement or state subsidies and explore instead the reader-supported paywall model. Also, we learned that if there is an important case, journalists join forces across the newsroom. Many people have managed to stay journalists for more than just a few years. Today, I have seasoned colleagues in their 40s and 50s who could lecture others in the art of freedom-minded journalism. Even though political interventions into public service media are still ongoing, there is functioning media plurality in Slovakia. And our state has never actually managed to build such a media propaganda empire as Orbán did in Hungary. We are also partly protected by a proportional election system that forces parties to cooperate and put some restraints on autocratic instincts. But of course, there is no insurance, and we are not insured. We understand that our democracy and freedom is so fragile. Inspirations from Orbán might teach our next candidates for an autocracy how to make their rule more lasting than just 4 years. Yeah, indeed, we can lose democracy from within through democratic elections. I think our American friends understand that very well. But I do reject arguments that post-communist countries are not built to live in the kind of democracy that the West has built. We journalists are here to warn about dangers and deviations, to alert whenever they appear, to alert whenever someone might to claim that there is a need for a different kind of tailor-made rule of law and democracy for each autocrat. Thank you so much.
Well, I can only say bravo, bravo. I think that was an extremely articulate, very well delivered summary of what has happened, not just in Slovakia and not just in former communist countries, but to living journalists like you, Beata, who have taken risks to bring the truth to light and to try and build the kind of strong media that you knew was needed, but you had no training initially to proceed with in the countries formerly ruled by professors of Marxism, Leninism. So I really am very grateful to you for such insights. The schedule has it that we should be discussing right now, but I think I would like to turn, if it's possible, to Ambassador Nemechek so that he could deliver his introductory remarks, which undoubtedly will give us the flavor too of 1989 and what it was like to stand on those freezing streets, as the ambassador from Slovakia recalled. So if I hope that the technology will magically link us to Ambassador Nemechek right now. If I should do something, please advise me what. But thank you really, Beata. So I'm being told that I'm muted, how is that possible?
Okay, I need to be unmuted from your side.
I see.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Perfect. So first of all, sorry for the disconnection. We were suddenly free of internet exactly in the moment where we needed it most. So I tried to do it through our cell phone. I will be very, very brief. I would like just to thank all of you who created this wonderful event, which we do together with Wilson Center and our Slovak colleagues every year. When the Velvet Revolution brought us back democracy and freedom 32 years ago, suddenly we were in what we thought was a natural state of things. We had a freedom to travel. We had a freedom not to know the result of the elections, even before the elections. We had a freedom to read what we want and speak about it to wherever we want. Basically, we entered the age of freedom. And we celebrate it every 17th of November. If you follow a little bit of the Czech media from the early morning, there is a long stream of people talking in Prague and other cities. Some of them have opinion, some of them have feeling masked as the opinion. Some of them are able to give logical arguments to what they believe. Some cannot present any logical argument. Some of the interventions are really clever. Some of them are pretty stupid, but all of that is freedom, because freedom is to be able to differ, to say so, and be able to take the consequences. Because at the end, we found in the age of freedom, there are two types of freedom. Freedom from from oppressive regime, from the state big brother telling you who you are, and freedom too. It's a freedom to speak your mind. And at the same time, we found that this freedom is never absolute, that every time at the end, you are somehow limited. You can be limited by the rules of your diplomatic profession. You can be limited by political correctness. You can be limited by the fear of the consequences of your free speech, because freedom is never automatic and it's never exactly cheap. And freedom is, first of all, the state of your mind. So with that, I would just wish to all of us to have courage to be really free and to recognize when we are really free. And I join you in thanking Beata on a very good lecture with a lot of factual examples of what is going on in our part of the world. Thank you. And one more time, sorry for not being able to connect in the correct time, because even internet and modern technology at the end show us how much we are really free. Thank you.
Indeed, we're all prisoners of the new technology to some extent. And certainly the pandemic seems to be progressing in a way that we will live with this for some time. But thank you so much, Ambassador, for those remarks and for that bracing endorsement of freedom, freedom from and freedom to. Exactly right. I believe that the schedule now called for me and Beata to discuss. And if everybody thinks that's okay, are we going to have a thumbs up to proceed? I certainly hope somebody will help if I need technical help to get the message across. Beata and I actually did talk briefly earlier, and I was recalling, as the ambassador from Slovakia also did, how cold it was, but how energetic and bracing in the freedom sense it was to be on the streets of Prague and of Bratislava, and indeed of Berlin and Sofia during those wonderful November days, and the energy that it took, and how perhaps what we haven't had in the ensuing 3 decades or so is a similar injection of energy, and whether we need that in order to keep the press free, keep the media free, and keep other structures out. And maybe I could invite you, Beata, to speculate a little bit on that.
We would be blessed if there is a continuous energy like it was in November, but it's not possible. There was that kind of energy linked to a very sad event, the murder of Ján Kuciak. After he died, there was a wave of massive protests because the country realized that we were getting to a crossroad, and the country realized that we are deciding now to which part of the world we are going to belong. And now we see that some of the things that we promised on the squares to people went wrong once again because of populism, because of politicians not realizing that there is public interest, and also because the mafia state, what we call mafia state, the penetration of political forces into police and prosecution and courts were just so deep. And the process of purging these institutions is just so long and painful. And people are getting really tired. And this, when it gets combined with the COVID and with the frustration from lockdowns and frustration of restrictions, there is a very strange combination when we not that only don't have any kind of ecstatic energy, we don't have energy at all. And this is also the space where cynically politicians take advantage from the frustration of the people. And they forget that we are now setting the limits for the society, and very selfishly, they just concentrate on their own option or their own chance to return to power. I will just say a couple examples that when we know that there is a health issue, when we know that vaccination is one of the tools that can help people to stay healthy, some politicians are calculating with that issue, and they are using the emotions against vaccination for their own political benefits, completely cynically, not really caring about the interest of the public. And populism, again, is just growing so strong. And in the same way as I mentioned in my speech, that we just are completely flooded by hoax and fake news. And some politicians just elevate hoax and fake news to the pedestal of facts. So once again, we live those sensitive times when we are thinking, how to generate that kind of energy, how to talk. Even today, I was really thinking like how to write my column, how to tell people about the values we need to remember. And you can go either banal and repeating phrases that many will think that sounds so hollow because of the times we live, or you can protest against someone. And we are in society right now are always against someone because the context forces us to do so. And that's why it's very difficult, because you can generate such kind of energy only when people are joined for something which is larger than they are. But power, like the goal to get into power and rule, it's not larger than people. So it will connect only marginal groups of the society who are angry, who are frustrated, and now some politicians are elevating them to be the decisive voice.
Yes, I think those dangers it should be emphasized though, are really to be seen across the world. And this is one thing that perhaps the way people respond is influenced by the communist past in the territories that used to be part of the Soviet bloc. But let's think about Daphne, murdered in Malta for doing her job as a journalist. Let's think about others who have done the same. And this is definitely not confined to former communist countries. There is a sort of a definite same similarity in some of the things that the ex-communist countries experience. During this past year, I've been lucky enough to be at the Institut für die Wissenschaften vom Menschen here in Vienna. And I was writing about media in Central and Eastern Europe. And a lot of people wondered why I included Austria in my examination. And true, at the time, I wondered, shall I put the word Inserate or not? Meaning these paid ads that apparently were used to funnel government state funds to political parties. We shall see how the scandal develops in Austria. But it's very much a lesson that there's no particular border or cultural asset that tends to limit freedom of speech. It's a desire of people who do not want to see people free, who do not really understand what this means and how enriching it can be if you are free. On that score, you really have written so forcefully and so beautifully. I'm going to invite you to speculate a little bit unfairly, but you had several words of criticism for Hungary. How do you see Orbán's Hungary developing? Because now we have the opposition united behind one candidate. There've been a number of, things that have been closed in media by the government, but equally plucky people finding the financing to get new platforms on board. So I think you do know the situation in Hungary. Obviously, we don't want to poke fingers too vehemently, but I would be interested to know if you see the beginnings of change in Hungary.
I would like to see. So it's hard for me to separate what is wishful thinking and what might actually happen. But the joining forces within the opposition, that's an important sign. But since I'm a journalist, let me comment on the state of journalism in Hungary. if you imagine that there are still some free media, but they are mostly websites that don't reach, very often they don't reach outside of Budapest. And we are facing here a centralized propaganda machine of the government, which is changing the definition of a journalist. And this is something which even politicians in Slovakia or elsewhere have adopted from Viktor Orbán, that the definition of a journalist is just to inform, to be just a microphone at a press conference. And that the role of a journalist is not to control the government. And this is how this whole machinery works, and they provide news for free. So if you imagine that we have several independent media which don't receive advertisement, because most of the big advertisers are somehow cautious of Orbán, they are not able to start a paywall because there is no such tradition in Hungary. So they are really in difficult situation. And I'm an ethnic Hungarian. So I speak Hungarian, and Hungarian is actually my mother language. And I learned Slovak as a second language, but by now I am bilingual, I can assure you. And I am trying to follow Hungarian media. And the truth is that you can switch channels from one to other, but when it comes to news, you see the same news content all over again. And you see news about migrants, how they are endangering Europe. And you hear about George Soros so frequently, more frequently than you hear about any other important personality in Hungary. Maybe this time the leader of the opposition might be George Soros in the frequency of being mentioned by the state-run media. But the point is that just recently, Robert Fico wrote a blog on my own newspaper, and he called my journalists a flock of swine of George Soros. And George Soros has been like his most successful export product. I heard from my colleagues from South Asia and from Asian countries that petty dictators, even in Asia, would use the George Soros argument. And what is happening, that whenever there is criticism, the answer is that the source of the criticism is somehow linked to George Soros, which is appalling. I can see it already now here in Slovakia. And that's why I made the comment that what is happening in Hungary, it's no longer just Hungary's problem. Because if in one European country, one European Union country, people can get away with such deformations of the media system and the rule of law, they will try even in other countries. And they might feel that it's okay. They might feel that Europe is powerless, impotent to somehow protect their own rules.
Thank you for that insight. I believe also that Brussels has a big role to play. And when we say Brussels, it always depends which Brussels do we mean. Do we mean just bureaucracy? Do we mean something very serious and philosophical about the rule of law? A combination of all those things. It's difficult to tell at the moment in Europe sometimes, but at the same time, one thing remains always true, that good journalism is the best way of holding people in power, and not just in political power, in all walks of life, in culture, in science, in manufacturing. People have to keep to standards, so they should know what they are. Sounds very
if I may just make one comment. When
Sure.
I spoke about Visegrad and the efforts to kidnap Visegrad, which we are talking about Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia and Hungary, I have to say that Slovakia has not joined this club of kidnappers. And I am very grateful for that. And I have to say that our Foreign Affairs Minister, Ján Kuciak, has been a critique of those efforts, which is very important. And we can see that so far Slovakia formulated very clearly that we don't think that the Visegrad region needs a different kind of rule of law, which from the rest of Europe.
Indeed. Thank you for that reminder. One thing I should say, anybody who wishes to pose a question to Beata should make themselves known so that we can handle that as we go on discussing these matters. During the time I spent researching in Vienna, I ended up producing a paper that has not seen the light of day, but that's fine, really. But I started out with a story from a Bulgarian journalist who was recalling sometime in the very early 1990s when he and other colleagues were sitting together and asking themselves, how long would it take to become Switzerland? And the answer of the carousing journalists at this time was maximum 8 years. This was for a generation that was impatient for change. What we've seen in Bulgaria reflects what we see in much of the rest of Central and Eastern Europe. The cascade of small political parties that get vaulted into power as the country searches for a solution to its basic problems of survival, of demographic weakness, and so on. And I just wondered if you feel that there would be any mileage in bringing together Central and East European leaders at this point, or are they in fact so dissimilar by this time? They were never totally similar. Every country was different, of course, and brought different history and different assets and different mistakes to the table. But now, is it worth it to try and bring people together? Or is it better to encourage individual development of each country as it arises? It's just a question that I have. I think it's an interesting one.
I think that it depends for what goal you are bringing together countries. We were talking about the goal of come up with an alternative bloc within the EU to fight EU rules. If that's the goal, I don't want to be part of that. But I think that bringing together countries in understanding what is the rule of law, or what are definitions of democracy, and what are the main problems of those countries, it's an important goal. Because what we don't often talk about, those are the lost generations. You know, it's the generation of my father, who he was in his 50s when the revolution came, or he was even younger, maybe 45. And he worked in a factory all his life. And then the factory was ruined because it was privatized by one of those mature people who didn't understand how to run companies, and he lost his job. And there were so many people who, at the time of revolution, didn't speak the language, didn't have job perspective. They weren't going to school, you know, to learn languages and explore how to reinvent themselves, how to enjoy all the freedoms. Like for them, freedom was that, oh, I have a television set and maybe I will have 60 channels of nothing to watch. And I think that generation who is still alive is now the one which feels I have been forgotten by this revolution. Mm-hmm. And they pass on this feeling to their children. That's why we have still so much sentiments which I wouldn't even call communist sentiments anymore. You know, those are sentiments of wanting to blame someone from my own misery, and being in a permanent search of enemy, permanent search of someone who is preventing me to have a decent life. And governments, one after other, fail to address that kind of problem. And these people are left at the mercy of the most awful populists. And I think until we make sure that people are not being left behind, it's very hard to talk about, you know, a country as a unity. Because of course you will have the intellectual elites who can speak very nicely about the values of democracy, and they can debate, discuss, and quarrel in at their forums about, you know, the gaps between East and West, cities and rural Slovakia. But the fact is that that's the toughest thing to solve. And of course, I'm a journalist. I don't have a solution, but this is one of the things I've understood, that because you mentioned that when we are becoming Switzerland, and so that's a big question, like when, you know, most people in a society will feel and will understand that yes, their lives have improved, but is it improved to the level that we no longer have families who have to live from 400 euros per month?
Yeah. Well, there are plenty of families struggling in the so-called Western countries too. I come from the United Kingdom, which certainly has a long record of prosperity, but also one of hardship. And I will pronounce no opinion at all about the government there. What I would like to remind everybody is, if you have a question to pose to Beata, this is a very good chance for you to get a discussion going with one of the most informed people in this region. Please make yourself known if you have got a question. If not, you and I have the happy task, Beata, of continuing on with our discussion. And it occurs to me that indeed issues of poverty or perceived poverty, as you noted with the response to the COVID, this is just generally a time where people are not feeling very confident about the future of the world. We've just had the summit in Glasgow, which brought the spotlight onto the most basic thing, which is, are we going to treat our planet as we should in order to survive? Put bluntly, it's like that. And one thing that was noticeable and was much remarked upon is that young people were very vocal in Glasgow and have been very vocal around the world. Is the situation in Slovakia, or indeed in the Visegrad region, also influenced by the activism of young people, or is it something that is less prominent? I actually would love to know the answer to this question. So take it away.
Yes, young people. I already mentioned protests after the murder of Ján Kuciak, and those were the young people who brought together the masses. Those were very young people who organized protests and who set the agenda. They decided they don't want any politicians there to talk, and they really carried the need for purging the prosecution, police, and the state institutions. Also, I know groups who are very active in climate issues and global warming, and they started a petition, and it was very successful. But the unfortunate situation is right now that because of the populism-driven public debate that is managed by politicians, especially now during COVID, somehow doesn't see climate changes as something that would bring them instant votes. And my newspaper just recently brought a story about how environmental activists become a new target for neo-Nazi and fascist groups to attack. And somehow it really shows that we do have groups of people who are encouraged by political attacks, that their hate against anything that might seem to them that comes from foreign influence and that might turn against something they said that it must be Slovak and let's protect it, they become very aggressive towards it. And I proudly say that my newspaper, SME, we are leaders in writing about environmental issues and really warning that there is no time just to hesitate, and warning that it is not one of those topics that will go away in 2 weeks, if we patiently wait until activists shout out their soul and they became silent. And but not all newspapers, not all media do that, because they don't feel that it is bringing, like clicks and bringing attention. Also, like COVID have pushed to sideline a lot of these issues, which are very important.
Yeah.
And I understand why it is happening. And I myself, I always wonder how to bring it back. And the biggest problem is, that when you are a journalist, your work is also busting fake news, myths, and disinformation.
Yeah.
But when you find yourself that in a week, like every day, you have to bust some kind of political statements, which involves a lie, that you are losing the power of agenda setting. And this is one of the big problems of the journalists today, that we have to fulfill several roles. We have to fact check the Facebook, fact check the social sites. We have to fact check politicians, and we have to make sure that when they say the biggest nonsense, that we react. And I can assure you that in my newsroom, like when we have the morning meeting of journalists, we ask our reporters to bring tips for stories and explain why they want to do it. So we so often talk like, okay, let's do it now because we want to do it, not because someone said something very stupid, not because someone attacked someone, not because there is so much lie in what we heard. Let's talk about, the Roma, like how Roma villages were quarantined during the lockdown and didn't get enough food. Like let's talk about these topics. And of course, it's a tough call, especially in times when you also live from readership and from paywall generated income. And so for me, that's the challenge. And I want to be the editor-in-chief who says that, okay, I think that this might not bring us so much income, but I think that's an important story.
Yeah. Absolutely, that's the question. I have a question from the audience. Somebody who notes that international organizations such as OSCE have a body of commitments to protect freedom of media from an ever-mighty state. But some media are now owned by oligarchs, as you described so much, oligarchic capture, and operate in the service of the state, of ruling leaders, or even when they are putatively private. Our international commitments don't seem to be quite adequate for this. How could we better identify and address this phenomenon?
I have been working and cooperating with international organizations over the past 4 or 5 years. I'm also a member of the board of International Press Institute. So we talk about it a lot. And I think that the issue is that for such a long time, international organizations have left Hungary behind. They shouted when there started some kind of media capture, but then they felt that, okay, they will focus on something else. So a lot of Hungarian journalists felt that they were forgotten by Europe. But right now, I understand that there are many international organizations who keep bringing into the attention of the EU that there are some serious problems. And I think that the only way to do it is to take these international watchdogs seriously. I mean, Reporters Without Borders, IPI, Committee to Protect Journalists, they do a lot of work. They go there, they interview journalists. So there is no such thing that international organizations don't know. As far as OECD is concerned, I was the one of its critiques over the past 2 years. And I felt that OECD was far too careful with commenting on some of the issues. And of course, I understand that OECD is here as an organization to try to persuade the autocrats or the leaders to cooperate and to do at least small steps in media freedom. But when you are ignored and you see that you are not even allowed to travel to that country, then just be critical. I understand that there is so much diplomacy involved because all the member countries have to approve who is going to be the OECD media person. But in the past, I mean, I would like to mention Miklos Haraszti. He was one of the people who really played in Slovakia such a positive role when there was the issue with our press code, which was like it include all the worst examples of like harmful press codes in the world. And at the time, OECD played a very crucial role in showing and telling the government that they should not go along and they should be careful with the press code. And I also understand, I'm realistic, so I understand that these organizations have to really tiptoe around the countries and try to find at least a little room to enter and to have a dialogue. But I believe that outspokenly, for these organizations who were set to watch the standards and protect free press, if they are outspoken enough and they show courage, even with the risk that the person will be recalled in 3 or 4 years, I don't know what is the length of the mission, it helps much more than you know, just like wishy-washy statements or too much diplomacy involved in telling that no, this is not acceptable. This completely goes against our own rules.
I tend to agree with you. And I think also we wouldn't have had, for instance, if we think of the foreign support lent to Václav Havel, to Jan Kuciak, to other people during the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, and most importantly, before the Velvet Revolution, when these people were viewed as sort of lonely eccentrics who thought that they had to improve a society that wasn't perfect, but where people basically had their basic needs met and therefore could survive, and were not so much thinking about the kind of revolution that in the end transpired.
But you know, also, if I may interrupt, there is also another problem that not many people, you know, who were part of the revolution stayed consistent. So we are also losing those personalities who would represent the very best sort of moral values of the revolution. Of course, in Hungary, they are, in Slovakia, there are a couple, but they are losing the sort of influence and a sort of public space to somehow show that it is possible to stay normal and preserve integrity for 30 years. And that is something, of course, as I said, there is a new generation growing up, people who were able to consistently remain journalists and preserve their integrity for more than 10 years. And it's a good news. But I wish that there are such people in politics as well, you know, that there is more kind of heritage to pass on and somehow to preserve some kind of golden rules. With that, of course, we want a new generation of politicians and we always say that, okay, we need a new generation of politicians who don't enter politics just to get rich, who understand public service. And we always wait that that generation will emerge, but it doesn't work like that. You know, there is no a miracles factory that will suddenly produce a new generation of journalists. It's only, you know, a hard work even for politicians to remain consistent, to resist the lures of populism, which is, I think that populism is today the one of the biggest dangers to democracy. You know, the kind of doing politics based on opinion polls, you know, based on who is shouting the most in the society, who is the most angry in the society, and we are going to tailor policies to satisfy these people because we are calculating that they might vote for us in elections. And that's dangerous.
I agree with you that it's dangerous to inflame people and that run the risk of emotions going out of control in some way. It definitely is a tendency, and I think that it has many, many roots. Part of it is the kind of shouty tone in which debate is held in many countries, not all. But if it's more lively, then it's often so dull that nobody's paying attention. It's a constantly evolving process. And I think that this lecture has amply proven how wonderful it is to spend an hour and a half pondering the state of our world and getting some clarity in our own heads too, as to what we consider to be important. It's all too easy to get caught up in the day-to-day production of media and the sort of the quarrel du jour that has got tongues wagging in Vienna or Bratislava. So it's really been an enlightenment to get a load of your thinking. And I can see why you have been chosen for this honor to deliver the Freedom Lecture. It's a wonderful way to commemorate what happened on November 17th, 1989. And I remember that day when I was actually in Germany and working for the Associated Press. And we were banned from leaving Germany because it was such a big story, the Berlin Wall had fallen. But the office in Vienna, which I ran, called me in Leipzig and said, we really think you should come back because there are thousands of people on the street in Prague, thousands of people on the street in Bratislava, thousands of people on the street in Sofia. And this is really the region that you're covering, Alison, not Germany. So indeed, I raced back just in time to catch the formation of Civic Forum at following weekend, and we know how the rest unfolded. For those of us who were there, call me old-fashioned, but it'll be, I'm sure, always one of, if not the very best time of my life. With that, I would like very much to give the word to two people who do much to foster ties between the Czech Republic, Slovakia, who don't need any encouragement, and with the United States. So if I could invite Ken Bambara to take the floor, the putative floor. He is the head of, I'm going to get this wrong, he's the vice chairman of Friends of Slovakia. In 2016, he retired from a 30-year senior economist with the US Government Accountability Office. And there he's also he's continued research and analysis for US Congress. So if he is available, could he please take the floor?
Yes, thank you, Alison. On behalf of Friends of Slovakia, I'd like to thank Ms. Balogová for an excellent lecture that is particularly rooted in her personal experience. I think we all gained a greater understanding and perspective on the challenges journalists face and how to cope with them in today's political environment. Now, at Ms. Balogova's request, FOS will be donating her honorarium to the International Press Institute in Vienna, Austria, in support of press freedom and investigative journalism. And I'd also like to thank the co-sponsors of the lecture, the Embassy of the Slovak Republic and Ambassador Javorčík, and the Embassy of the Czech Republic and Ambassador Komoneček, as well as American Friends of the Czech Republic, all of whom have been our partners over the history of this Freedom Lecture series. Our thanks also to the Wilson Center for its support in hosting the Freedom Lecture for what has now been the 22nd edition of the series. Finally, our thanks to our moderator, Allison, who led a very insightful discussion. And I'd also like to thank the staffs of the organizations involved in putting this on, particularly the technical staffs who kept us on track. And I'd also like to thank our FOS board member, Scott Thayer, who organized the lecture from the FOS side. And of course, I'd also finally like to thank the audience who took time to tune into the event. We hope you all enjoyed it. And with that, back to you, Allison.
Thank you very much. That was very kind. Now I would like to give the floor to Roger Kohut, the president of the Friends of the Czech Republic. I believe you're available to leap into our little box here.
Thank you, Allison. On behalf of the American Friends of the Czech Republic, I echo my friend Ken Bombra's earnest thanks to convey to the Friends of Slovakia, to the Embassy of the Slovak Republic, the Embassy of the Czech Republic, and Ms. Balogová for delivering such a remarkable presentation today. This has truly been a wonderful morning, and the ensuing discussion, Allison, that you've led has been very rich. And I pass my deep appreciation as well to the Wilson Center for again hosting the annual Freedom Lecture that ties Czech and Slovak friendship organizations and respective embassies in Washington together to advance parallel aims. The connection between Czechs and Slovaks, the United States, and President Woodrow Wilson is a profound one, and it's fitting we celebrate it this way. 32 years after the fall of communism in Czechoslovakia, I'm reminded, particularly today, of the essential role that a free press plays in protecting and sustaining liberal democracy and civil society. And we look forward to working continually for those aims. So thinking ahead to next November, on behalf of the American Friends of the Czech Republic, we're looking forward to another lecture. But this has been a wonderful way to be together. Thank you so much, Allison. Back to you.
Thank you very much. And thanks to everybody, especially those who have followed us from wherever in the world. This is one of the great things about Zooms and technology that we have all become familiar with over the last 18 to 24 months. And it enables us to reach people and hopefully get them thinking about issues that maybe have not really crowded in on their thinking, or they've thought were unique to a certain area of the world or a certain politician. It just remains for me to thank everybody very much for inviting me to do this moderation, which I truly enjoyed because Beata had such wonderful insights and does not speak in that shouty, shrill voice that so much of debate these days is conducted in. Thanks to the Slovak embassy and to the Czech embassy and to your respective heads of the ambassadors. A great pleasure for me. It's always a wonderful thing to be reminded of how much I value the friendships that I formed covering Eastern Europe, and particularly in Czechoslovakia, in fact, journeying there many, many times during communist rule, and unfortunately rather fewer times once things were more calm and quote unquote normal and needed attention, perhaps not as much as, say, the war in Yugoslavia, which I was also covering. So enough about me. It's been a wonderful time. Thank you so much, everybody at the Wilson Center, for making this happen. And let's roll on to the next year of the Freedom Lecture. Goodbye.